Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Let's Dev, where today we're continuing work on our game about a game, Gaming the Gamer. The last time we added interactables to the game in the form of pots, pushable rocks, and swimming fins, each coded to have their own unique behaviors. These additions came on the tail end of a giant influx of new player-focused items and weapons to help flesh out the base game of our experience. But we're taking a break from the addition of new content to focus on fixing what's already been added. We'll be starting with one new major addition, and that's the chat room. We're adding this thing now in order to track down a very specific issue that's plagued the project for quite a while now. We'll also take a look at the enemy code and see if we can't begin making some tweaks to balance and improve the overall feel of our game. Now that sounds like a plan, so let's get to the coding. So first up was the addition of the chat, which would be handled via a DS list. Each entry in this list would consist of a random number representing the chatter and the latest input popped from our input queue, and this list would be updated once per tick. Next, the in-game menu was moved over to make way for our chat box, which would display the latest 10 inputs made to the queue. And the original math displayed for each input was initially backwards, which I only mentioned because testing this new chat feature revealed something I suspected all along. By comparing the player inputs with the chat's output, I was able to confirm the input queue was in fact broken. Some inputs were being eaten while others were being recorded out of order. So it was time to figure out why this was happening. The unfortunate downside of using stacks meant that there was no way to display the entire stack like you would a list. And believe me, I spent over 30 minutes trying. So focus was placed elsewhere. The first was the player and their input cooldown. Removing the cooldown did not fix the issue. Inputs were still broken. And so next, the DS stack was changed into a DS list, which was a significant task to undertake given just how many different places references our stack code. But the hard work paid off because we finally found our culprit. The DS stack was either functioning too quickly or too slowly, resulting in dropped or misrecorded inputs. Whatever the cause, changing it to a DS list, while admittedly overkill for its purpose, allowed the input queue system to work as it should. And an interesting side note, the input queue issue also seemed to affect the tick rate, because now that the inputs were no longer being dropped, it meant that the quote-unquote chat inputs were being added literally every 5 frames. That's roughly 12 inputs per second. Anyway, now with our input queue working as it should, it was time to fix up our enemies. The enemy movement was slightly altered to disregard any diagonal data. This ultimately wouldn't change much, but it would at least help make the enemy's pathing more predictable. A similar restriction was also added to the enemy projectiles, allowing them to only fire in 4 cardinal directions. Again, these weren't substantial changes to the enemies, but it would at least make them a bit more predictable, which is welcome considering the existing chaos that is the input queue. So to finish up the session, I decided to try adding one more thing, a throw system. This again would be another DS list. Each tick would roll for a chance for the chatters to grief the player. The first of these would require a list of all the tiles surrounding the player. Their locations are recorded, and any quote-unquote dangerous tiles, which for now would be water, would remain and safe tiles would be removed. From that new list, one tile would be chosen, and the corresponding input for that direction would be added to the input queue. In other words, the grief would be an attempt to deliberately pilot the player into a nearby danger. And testing, well, I have no idea if it worked. I'm almost positive it doesn't work and instead just continuously forces the player to move right. However, I was out of time for this session, so for now, forcing the player to move right was all that this elaborate code would do. As expected, a lot of the attempts to fix the existing code would take up much of today's session. However, we managed to track down and fix one huge bug and tinker with a few of the lesser. And I'm actually really hoping to figure out or improve this throw system going forward, because there's a lot of fun stuff that can be done with it. But sadly, that'll have to wait because this brings us to the end of today's episode of Let's Dev. So leave a like if you enjoyed the episode, subscribe and turn on notifications if you haven't already, and leave your thoughts on our progress in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.